Okay, any questions on 1 through 4? Remember that the exterior angle theorem says that the measure of an exterior angle is the sum of the two remote interiors. So angle X would be A plus B. Okay, how about 5, 6, 7, and 8? So for 5 and 6, I would just recommend you do the exterior angle theorem. So I would just do that plus that equals this exterior angle. But if you decide that you want an expression for this angle in here, and you want to add them to 180, make sure that you find that expression correctly. So I showed you over here. If you decide you want to do 36 plus 8x minus 1 plus this angle measure equals 180, make sure you're finding that angle measure correctly, okay? And that means it has to be subtracting the whole thing. So that would turn into 175 minus 11x. I wouldn't really recommend doing it that way. I would just use exterior angle theorem. But if you're going to find a supplement, make sure you have the parentheses where you need to so that you do that correctly. I can't remember. Okay, questions on anything on the first page? Okay. About the second page. I will zoom in on 11 and beyond that because I know there's a lot happening. It's kind of hard to read it from how spread out they are. So on number 10, is that an exterior angle? No, Frankie, why not? Okay, I want you to try to explain to me why it's not. Because if one of your friends is like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Is this the exterior angle? And to do the exterior angle thing, you're like, no, it's not. I don't know why, but it's just not. They're not going to know why, huh? Yes. What should it be if it's an exterior angle? Yeah, it should be a linear pair, right? Remember that an exterior angle is formed by extending one side of the triangle and then using the existing side. So this angle out here is an exterior angle. So an exterior angle needs to be a linear pair with one of the interior angles. This one's vertical, so you can just pull that directly inside and do triangle angle something if you want, but just make sure you're not trying to use exterior angle theorem where it does not apply. Okay, so here's number 11. Again, I'm just zooming in because I know there's a lot of numbers there to pay attention to. If I ask you to show work on the diagram, what I mean is what I did there. Okay, I want you to just show me the numbers so that I can see what you're thinking. And if you make a mistake, we can kind of, figure out what the mistake was. So you don't have to write equations. Like there doesn't need to be like 72 plus 72 plus X. Like you don't have to make an equation like that. Right, just show me the work on the picture. Here's number 12. And again, in an isosceles triangle will have two congruent sides. What do you call the angles that are across from them that are congruent? An isosceles triangle has congruence. What are those called? Base angles. What do you call the angle that's not one of the base angles? What do you call this angle up here? It's formed by the two legs. Starts with V. Nobody? It's the vertex angle. Yeah, that's called the vertex angle. So you need to know that vocab, because if I am describing an isosceles triangle and I don't tell you, you know, here's a picture, or if I don't say triangle ABC, the isosceles, and AB are the legs, and I'll show you the picture, you need to make sure you know what I'm talking about when I say base angles and vertex angle. Okay, so in this picture, 104 would be your vertex angle, and your base angles are congruent at both 38. Okay, here's number 13. And here's number 14. Would it be helpful to talk through one or more of those? Okay, I'll go back up in a minute. Would anybody like me to talk through number 14? Go up here for Caroline. I wanted to see this one. Okay, so again, I would use exterior angle theorem. That is equal to the sum of the remote interiors. If you decide you want to do 50 plus 4x plus 22 plus this angle measure, that needs to be 180 minus the quantity, 12 plus 9x. Okay, so that will turn into 168 minus 9x. That negative will distribute. Okay, any questions on homework problems? Anything you'd like me to go over, explain, Yana? I'm sorry, which one? 14, 128? You okay with that one? All right. Let's take a couple minutes and talk about kind of expectations and how things will be and whatever for us being online. So some of you might have thought about the canned food drive. So let me back up a minute. We are not going to have final exams for first semester. So for first semester, 50% will be your quarter one grade, 50% will be your quarter two grade. Last spring, I know some schools did this and Cathedral did as well. We kind of said fourth quarter is not going to affect your grade. Whatever you had in the third quarter is going to be your grade for the semester. That's not going to happen this time. Okay, so just make sure you know second quarter is going to count. You won't have a final grade, but you will have half of your quarter of your semester grade will be from quarter one, half will be from quarter two. Last spring, I didn't give tests. I gave like my normal like long quizzes after every few sections, and every once in a while a short quiz here or there, like just kind of check for understanding type of thing. But that probably is what I'll do as well. I haven't really decided that for sure, but I probably will continue to do that and just give you quizzes over, you know, a group of sections and maybe not a full chapter test. So if that happens, I won't throw out your lowest quiz. I'll count all the quizzes. So it'll just, I'll redistribute kind of how the quizzes are counting versus the tests and versus homework and everything. Those of you that contributed to the canned food drive might have realized that we don't have semester exams and might be worried about that. The canned food drive bonus will go toward your spring semester final. So it'll just get postponed. Since there's no fall final, we'll just count that toward your spring final instead. Okay. Most of the quizzes I will be giving you on ClassKick, just like we did with this most recent quiz. And that way I can, you know, kind of see what you're doing as you're doing it, and you can show work. The thing about Schoology quizzes is it's not very easy to show work. And there are some other, like I used a few other platforms last year for quizzes as well. So it just kind of depends on what the questions are and whether multiple choice is, you know, a good option for that or not. So instead of, I know that some of you who took ClassKick quizzes prior to this, I would grade it, export a PDF and send that to you. That is very time consuming. I'm not going to be doing that for like 120 students every time I give a quiz. So when you log into ClassKick, you'll see, so we just kind of did this last class. So when you do a quiz in Class Kick and Judy Barthel wrote her name for me. So let's say that I grade it. When I'm finished grading it, I will make it so that it is visible to you, but that it's locked. So you won't be able to change anything on it, but you will be able to log back into ClassKick and see it. So when you get quiz grades, instead of me kind of returning the quiz to you, you'll just log back into ClassKick and I'll make it visible. So once I've posted a grade for all the classes for that particular quiz, I'll make it visible to you so you can see what mistakes you're making. Okay. I think I just mentioned this, but due times in Schoology. So for example, the assignment we just checked, I think I didn't have a due time on that. Let me double check that. Leave it on me. Oh, there we go. So I will use the same format as I have with the weekly folders and the update, kind of saying what assessments and everything is coming up. On the assignments that you turn in today, I did not change the due time. See where the due time says 11:59. That's the default that Schoology uses. So if it says 11:59 or if there's no time on it, you again should just assume that every assignment is due by the beginning of the next class period, unless I specifically say like this isn't due until Tuesday or this is due at the end of the day today. You know how I'll write like due by 4 p.m. If it's something like a video lesson or if it's a quiz or something where I'm going to let you do it by the end of the day, it'll say that in the description. But it is very, very time consuming and tedious for me to go through every class period and change all the due times and due dates for every single assignment. And I've been doing that and it's been killing me. So I'm probably not going to continue to put due times on those. You just need to make sure that you're aware of, when your next class period is. And again, you submit it as soon as you're done, you're less likely to forget to submit it on time. Okay, as far as attendance goes, when you join the Zoom, you need to have your camera on. Hi, Sam. So when I'm doing attendance, my husband got very tired of me saying, hi, Hannah, turn your camera on, please. Emmett, hello, turn your camera on, please. When we first start, when I'm doing attendance, you need to have your camera on so that I can do attendance quickly and not have to keep like waiting for people to join and then also for people to turn the cameras on, okay? You need to have your camera on when you join. And then once we start doing something on Notability, obviously your camera goes off. If you have Wi-Fi connection issues, where your iPad cuts out a lot, one option is to try join the Zoom on your phone if that works better. Use cell data rather than your Wi-Fi, especially if you're at home and you have siblings, you have parents or whatever also using Wi-Fi. Zoom can be a little finicky when your Wi-Fi is cutting in and out. So in order to not get kicked out and whatever, if you just join Zoom on your phone, then you can use your iPad and you won't have issues with that. You need to make sure, this is for every class, you need to be joining a Zoom at the beginning of every class period. And there might be times where I check attendance also sometimes throughout the period, or maybe at the very end of the period. If I call on you and you are like nowhere to be found, you're going to be considered unverified. So you cannot just join the Zoom at the beginning and then disappear. Okay, so make sure that you are staying connected the whole time. There might be times where I say, okay, we're going to go over homework. I'll do a short lesson with you, and then I will stay on Zoom the whole period, but you don't necessarily have to stay on Zoom. Or if it's like a review day, where you're just going to work on stuff, and then I'll be in the Zoom if you want to come back and ask me questions. But you should be expected to be in the Zoom unless I specifically say that you can leave. If you do have a problem with Wi-Fi or you know, just illness, whatever the situation is, it's always better to over communicate than to kind of not say anything and have me or your other teachers wondering what's going on, right? So if you know that like your Wi-Fi went down, okay, then try joining on your phone. If that's not an option, then you know that's fine. But you need to make sure you're communicating that. You can't just like not turn something in or not be on the Zoom and be like, oh yeah, my Wi-Fi went down. Like you need to be communicating that. Okay. And then lastly, again, most of your assessments, this is very important. Please do not ignore this. Most of your assessments will be on ClassKick. Most of your quizzes will be on ClassKick. And obviously you're at your house and you're not sitting here in front of me. I had everybody do a ClassKick quiz yesterday, 2 days ago for you guys, I think, so that we, you know, we'd all make sure we could get in, you understood how to answer a multiple choice question, like that kind of stuff. But the expectation is you're not using any of their apps, you're not using notes, you're not chatting with your friends, you're not taking screenshots and sharing those, you're not, you know, looking things up. So, you know, there's only so much I can do to monitor that when you're not in front of me, but that is the expectation and you need to be following that. Okay, that's the integrity that we're looking for, because it's really not fair if, you know, somebody's at home using their notes, looking things up as they're going through the ClassKick and somebody else is not, you know, they're doing what they should be doing. So please, please, please show the moral character that, you know, is necessary, that you're going to have to expect it from yourself, because I'm not going to be there, you know, on top of you watching to make sure you're doing the right thing. Okay, what questions do you have as far as, as far as how classes go? Somebody asked me about video lessons. You will still have some video lessons, but I'm going to be teaching you, you know, just like right now, I'm teaching the kids who are at home on Zoom. Most of the class periods will be me teaching you live. So like with admission Mondays, because those were only 30 minutes, I didn't always feel like it was worthwhile for you to come in and me to check attendance and then, you know, for me to try to teach you something in a rushed manner and then maybe not get through it, or you have to rush through it, whatever. But with the regular class period, it's easier for me to be able to actually teach a lesson. So I imagine we're going to have some kind of variation on what the current schedule is, probably not a lot of change. We'll probably still have classes that are about the same length as they are now. Like I said, I think they're probably trying to figure out how to put in a flex or something like that more regularly. Okay. Okay, so first of all, when I tell you that two triangles are congruent, so if triangle ABC is congruent to triangle ADC, how do you know that angle D and angle B should be congruent? Madeline? Right, they're in the same spot, right? And the triangles are congruent. So of course they should be congruent because they're corresponding parts of the two triangles that are congruent. So if I were to write that as like a definition or a theorem or whatever, do you know what that would be? The triangles are congruent, therefore all of the corresponding angles and sides are congruent. Any idea? Okay, so there's two ways you can explain this. One is to say, that's just the definition of congruent triangles. Okay, so that's kind of the short way. But the way you can also describe it is by this sentence: corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Now, you can abbreviate that. And the abbreviation that I would like you to use is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Some of you who may have had geometry before, your teacher might have let you write this abbreviation. Unfortunately, like half the time, students don't even know what that stands for and start using that in like the incorrect situation. So I don't want you to use that abbreviation. Sometimes if you look up like an answer in a book, or if you're looking up at something online, you might see CPCTC, and that is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. It's just that those letters, sometimes I'm not sure that you even understand what it means. Okay, so we're going to work through this proof. The proofs are the same exact thing as what you're doing when you're deciding if the triangles are congruent on a normal problem. Right, so you've got given information. What else could we mark on the picture that's not currently marked? Okay, so if you were to write a statement for that, you would say vertical angles are congruent. And then are the triangles congruent? Anybody? Are the triangles congruent? Do we have enough marked? Daniel? Reason would be side angle side. Okay, so basically the proof, we're literally doing the same thing we've been doing. It's just that you're going to write down the steps in like a logical way to explain how you know things are true. It's very important that as you write information down, you mark it on the picture. Sometimes I kind of don't like they do this, but sometimes they'll mark on the diagram the givens, and then sometimes you forget that that was information that was actually given. Okay, but every time you write something down, you make sure it's marked on the picture. Okay, segment BA is compared to segment DA. If it's marked on the picture, that is given. Segment CA and EA are congruent. Again, they've marked that on the picture. That is given. Okay, Emmett told me that angle CAB is congruent to EAD because vertical angles are congruent. Now, if you were writing that step yourself, because there will be problems where obviously proofs where you are not going to be given all the statements, you have to write them yourself. Remember the order matters. So if you were to match those up, you could like kind of fold it and they would match up. You don't have to twist it or anything. So C goes to E, right? And B goes to D. So when you name angle CAB, you go CAB, you want to make sure you follow the same order in the other triangle, so EAD. Why can't you just write angle A is congruent to angle A? Why can't you refer to those angles as angle A? Caroline. Yeah, there's multiple angle A's, right? So remember that if an angle has more than one, if there is a vertex that has more than one angle with that same vertex, you have to use the long name. So for that one, we would say CAB and EAD or some similar kind of statement. Okay, the triangles are congruent. And the reason is what? What's the reason? Side angle side. So remember, those are always used, those shortcut ways are always used to justify why triangles are congruent. Now, these proofs will have one extra step at the bottom. After you prove the triangle's congruent, then they're saying because the triangles are congruent, all the parts are going to match up to be the same. So angle C and angle E are congruent. Now, you can either write definition of congruent triangles. Okay, that's perfectly fine. It's a little bit shorter. Some students prefer that. You can also write corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Right? Because the triangles are congruent, all the things that are in the same spots are congruent. Now, just as an aside here, angle C and angle E, notice that you can use one letter for them because they only have, there's only one angle with that vertex. If you were, though, to name that like with the long name, again, you have to make sure you do it in corresponding order. So if you said BCA, you would want to say DEA. But whenever you are able to use the just one letter to name the angle, it kind of makes it easier. Okay, you're going to notice all of these proofs kind of go the same way. They're going to give you stuff, and there's going to be things you can figure out. You're going to mark the picture. You're going to say the triangles are congruent. And at the end, sometimes they'll ask, okay, if the triangles are congruent, why are these parts congruent? And it's definition congruent triangles. Okay, next problem. You have not seen a flow proof before. We don't use these a lot, but I just kind of wanted you to see what a flow proof looks like. It's called that because it's kind of like a flow chart, right? The arrows are there to tell you how to go from like one step to the next. The nice thing about a flow proof is that you can see that, for example, for this first given, that's not leading to anything before being used as congruent parts of congruent triangles. You can see that this reflexive to give you segments, that's not using for anything other than the way to say the triangles are congruent. However, the midpoint is going to go through something else before you're able to use it. So it sort of shows you how things are related. You know how sometimes you're writing a proof and you're like on step 5 and you're like, I have no idea why step 5 is true. Well, it's like up here, something from step 3 that you said. It's not necessarily from directly before it. So a flow proof is sort of nice in the sense that it will kind of be a little bit more obvious how one thing leads to the next. Flow proofs also might be drawn horizontally. Sometimes it's easier to write them vertically just because it fits on the page better. But a lot of times you'll see the flow proofs going this way. You'll have like all of your givens here. And then, you know, they all might be flowing into a thing like this, but it would go sideways instead of vertically. Just depends on the problem and how many steps it has and how it's structured. Okay, again, every time you write down something, you need to make sure it's marked on the picture. With a flow proof, you'll have the statement and the reason both in the same box. So that also kind of shows you, you know, that like how they're related, they'll be in the same box together. So given segment AB is compared to segment AC, and we got that marked on the picture, so that's good. And that says M is the midpoint of segment BC. Well, what does it mean for M to be a midpoint? M is the midpoint of segment BC, therefore what? No. Okay, so if you say segment BM, you're going from here to here. You have to be careful about the order because with congruent triangles, the things that the vertices that correspond have to be in the same place. Yeah, so the second one needs to be CM. And obviously MC and CM are the same segment, but it does matter about the order. So if you start with B and go to M, you want to start with C and go to M. And in the step down there, they said BM, and so we will put CM. And after I write that, then I want to do what? Mark it on the picture. Okay, reflexive property. So even if you hadn't seen that that's what the box said, what can I mark on the picture by reflexive? Zach, what can I mark on the picture because of reflexive? Segment AM is congruent to segment AM. So I'm going to mark that and write the statement. Reason is reflexive property of congruence. Now, again, you want to notice that this is like a given, and then this midpoint led us to something else that's then being used to get the triangles congruent. Obviously, that's side, 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 right? What's the correct order for the letters? Angle AMB and angle AMC. Sorry, triangle. AMB and triangle AMC. Now, again, this was not asking you to prove the triangles congruent. This was asking you to prove that a pair of angles are congruent. The way that these proofs always work is they'll give you information, you'll use things that you know, you'll prove the triangle's congruent, and then you'll use the corresponding parts to get your last step. Okay, so even though it didn't tell you to prove the triangles were congruent along the way, that's what you need to do, right? So angle AMB is congruent to angle AMC because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Or, again, if you're writing this yourself, you could just write definition of congruent triangles. But again, we're not going to use CPCTC. Some teachers like that, I don't. I inherited that dislike from one of my teachers. So they translated, you should also not like it. All right, let's go import homework number 42. And there is a correction I need you to make. So on the second page, that little weird looking symbol there, that's supposed to be segment RU. Something either got lost in translation with a different version of Word, or maybe when I printed to the PDF, some math symbol didn't translate over correctly. So that weird looking thing is a weird looking thing. It's not supposed to be there. So for that problem, we'll use segment RU as the segment that you're given a midpoint for. Okay, I wanted to talk through the first proof with you. So if you prefer, I'm not putting lines there because I don't want you to think you have to have, like, I'm not going to tell you how many answers, how many statements you have to have, how many steps there are. So if you haven't done this before, just remember that you can put in your own, rows there. You can just draw in your own rows if you need it to get it lined up so that it's not, super messy. Some of us are neater than others. I don't know if it will let you. It might. No, it's not going to let you. Because of the way the PDF is, it's not going to let you pull in lined paper there. Okay, given segment CD bisects. I'm going to be lazy and just copy all this over. Segment CD bisects segment AE. Segment AD and CD are parallel, and angle E is congruent to angle BCA. Okay, so anything that is not marked on the picture right now, that's all you're given. Bless you. Anything that's not marked on the picture, we're going to make sure we mark. So it's already shown that those segments are parallel, but remember that I suggest it's a good idea for you to stretch out those lines that are parallel, so it's a little bit easier to see where there's a transversal that you could use with those two parallel lines. Okay, so we've got our given. What should I mark on the picture that's not already marked from what I've written so far? Is there anything given that's congruent that I can mark on the picture? Yana? Angle E and angle BCA are congruent. So I want to make sure I mark those. Every time you write it down, you want to mark it on the picture. Okay, and the parallel is already shown. We can't actually mark something on the picture yet because we have to write a statement that comes from segment CD is bisecting segment AE. What does that statement give you? What does it mean for CD to bisect segment AE? Henry? AC and EC. Okay, so I have a question. Does vertex A correspond to vertex E? Angle A and angle E. So tell me the correct order. Okay. And again, it's not that it's wrong to say those segments are congruent, but you need to get yourself in the habit of making sure that the notation matches what the picture says. Okay, so reason for that would be what? Okay, definition of a segment bisector, or definition of bisect, or definition of bisects, or definition of bisector. There's lots of different things you could write there, but yeah, that's a segment bisector that's cutting that in half. And after I write that, I'm going to make sure that I mark on the picture. It is really easy for your eyes to interpret those parallels as congruent. just make sure that if you have parallel there, that you're not assuming those segments are congruent, because parallel segments don't have to be congruent. Okay, make sure you're paying attention to parallel. The other thing is that sometimes they will ask you to prove an angle is congruent to another angle, and in your head you're thinking triangle. Just kind of be extra careful about looking at the proof statement. Are they asking you triangles or are they asking angles? Same thing with the given. You know, make sure you're paying attention to, are they talking about triangles that are going to be congruent or angles? All right, step 3. What should we write next? Daniel? Okay. Angle BAC is congruent to angle DCE. If parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then corresponding angles are congruent. That's what Daniel said. Could you use the shortcut? Could you, on that step, have used a shortcut? So could I call that angle A? Could I call that angle C? Would this be okay to say that? Henry? You can call angle B and C, but you can't call angle B, C. Correct. So if you want to call that angle, call that angle A instead, that's fine, right? I know exactly which angle you're talking about if you say angle A. But if you say angle C, I'm not going to know, do you mean this angle? Do you mean this angle? Do you mean this angle? Do you mean this angle or that angle? I don't know what angle you're talking about, right? So just make sure that if you're going to use the one letter name, that it's not unclear, ambiguous, which angle you're trying to refer to. So you could write it that way if you wanted. So those are corresponding angles. And again, I'm going to make sure that I mark on a picture every time I write down a statement about congruence. Okay, do we have enough to say the triangles are congruent yet? Okay. Keep pestering, tell me why the triangles are congruent.
Would that be ASA?
Yes, angle, side, angle. Remember that angle, side, angle, and side, 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 like all those shortcuts are ways to prove triangles congruent. So if you're using that as a reason, it better say over here that triangles are congruent. Okay, and if you're saying triangles are congruent, the reason needs to be one of those shortcuts. Okay, now we have proven what exactly it asks us to prove. Let's say that instead of having that as your proof statement, let's say that instead it said prove segment BC is congruent to segment DC, something like that. Okay, you'd still do the same exact thing, except there'd be one more step, right? Your last step would be segment BC is congruent to segment DC, and your reason would be what? What would be the reason that you would write for why those segments are congruent? Sam, tell me what their reason should be for number 5. I wrote DC and I meant DE.
DC.
Those segments congruent.
Corresponding part. Corresponding parts to congruent triangles are congruent.
Corresponding parts of triangles are congruent. You could also say corresponding segments of congruent triangles are congruent, or corresponding angles of congruent triangles are congruent, right? But if you just say parts and then I'll cover angles and sides, you don't have to think so hard. Or What's the other option? What else could you write? Riley, what's the other option for that reason? Right. So again, I'll kind of use them interchangeably. I probably write definition of congruent triangles more often, but I try to say both of them so that you get comfortable hearing both of them and knowing that they're the same thing. But if you're writing the proof yourself, you get to decide what you put there. You don't have to say both. Either one is fine. Okay, so notice that like number 2, it's saying prove these segments congruent. Well, you're going to prove the triangles congruent, and then you're going to use definition of congruent triangles. Okay, this one says prove triangles congruent, so we'll be using some of those reasons. This one says prove segments are congruent. So you will prove the triangles congruent, and then you'll use the corresponding parts because the triangles are congruent. Okay, that one says prove triangles. That one says parallel. You've got steps here for that, so I think that will be a little easier because you don't have to come up with the whole thing yourself. Okay, but just notice that if it says prove a pair of angles congruent or prove a pair of segments congruent, then your reason is going to be definition of congruent triangles, which means you want to prove the triangles congruent first, and then you can use the definition.